evening and welcome to For the Record. It's the holy month of Ramadan for Muslims, a time dedicated to fasting, peace and self-reflection. But a number of Muslim states around the world are embroiled in war and turmoil even during this sacred time in the Islamic calendar. Tonight's discussion is about the terrorist group Islamic State, or IS, as it's better known around the world. Of course, you could say that we in Fiji are worlds away from that conflict, but the reality is the influence of IS has reached our region. It's in our backyards, so to speak. Australia has one of the highest rates of recruitment for the Islamic State. To find out why we have in studio with us Imam Afroz Ali, a former Fiji resident and one of the leading clerics in Islam. Brother Afroz, thank you very much for making time to be with us tonight. I suppose I've led into the first question. How much of a risk is Islamic State for this region, for Fiji and our neighboring countries?
Well, firstly, thank you very much for inviting me to this show, and I think it's a very important topic that we need to talk about and have a public discussion about this. Within the region, we are seeing that this is in fact, the reach of ISIS is well established. Whether this in fact actually affects Fiji at this point of time, I think is, I don't want to say yet to be seen, because we don't want to see this in fact occurring through such a wonderful country like Fiji. However, there is evidence that in fact people from within Fiji in fact have been accessing videos and information about ISIS, which is not necessarily available to the public, but you'd actually have to have contact with people who may be involved with ISIS in terms of recruitment. So it is a matter that we need to be alert about, but not necessarily be alarmed about as far as it is concerned here in Fiji. Certainly in Australia and within New Zealand, etc., this matter is well established that in fact people are involved, and we obviously have recruits who actually are fighting in Syria and Iraq, as well as those who actually have been killed, without a doubt, in the war that continues to be in that region.
You and others like you, senior clerics, senior members of the Muslim community, have started a movement against IS. Not a violent movement, but something that goes around the world and talks about what Islam really means. And you're in fact trying to reach out to these recruits, to these people fighting for IS. I mean, what exactly is this movement about?
You're absolutely right. The only answer to violent movements is intellectual education and discourse, for people to actually know at the heart level, rather than at the brain level, that in fact violence is not the solution. So the work of, say for example, the National Imams Consultative Forum within Australia, as well as the international endorsement of scholars for over 126 muftis and major jurists who exist as the core body of Muslim scholars around the world, have in fact done an incredible amount of work to actually put together information to refute the claims of Baghdadi, particularly his claim in terms of what ISIS in fact actually stands for. And one of the papers, called the Open Letter to Dr. Ibrahim Awad al-Baghdadi and to the fighters and followers of the self-declared Islamic State, is endorsed by approximately 126 scholars from around the world. You can in fact download this paper from lettertobaghdadi.com, and available for the public to see as well. And whilst the letter is directed to Baghdadi, the important matter is that it is directed to those who may be easily recruitable, for them to be able to see what does Islam truly say based on the claims of what Baghdadi says that ISIS is based on. So this whole idea about, say for example, taking slavery, the idea of actually chopping people's heads off. What does Islam say about this? What is the evidence behind this, despite the claims made by all sides, including Muslim terrorists who in fact are involved in much killing that actually is occurring in Iraq and Syria.
For those of you who may not be aware, al-Baghdadi is the leader of the Islamic State, and the man behind much of the fighting that's going on in certain parts of the Middle East, Iraq and Syria, as mentioned by Imam Afroz. Now, of course, you've sent out the letter. You're trying to stop people from being recruited, mostly young men.
That's correct.
Who follow Islam.
Unfortunately,
what's the attraction?
Yeah, just very quickly, young men and a small number of young women who in fact have been attracted to this adventure of war, unfortunately. The attraction is by far and large a rebellion to society that the youth are feeling, I must say that at the first instance, the general youth community around the world, regardless of religion, are actually asking some very legitimate questions in relation to the problems that actually occur because of the politics of war through the governments of the world. This is something that we can't neglect, that in fact there is a politics of war going on that is not safe for anybody. Much of political bias that actually occurs from this leads the youth to actually ask many questions. That usually is the first step by which you then have those troubled youth, particularly who are coming from well-established psychologically disturbed backgrounds, who then want to seek an identity because the society have rejected them. And then you put the volatile mix of selected religious passages. It gives you a sense of purpose. And then you put to that temptations of money, because ISIS pays its soldiers, if you could even call them soldiers, including even marriage, for example. So you have youth out there who are, looking for some adventure, looking for, unfortunately, sexual encounters, money, etc. These are the things by which ISIS are attracting the youth in that regard. There is not a single evidence that there are those who are well established in Islamic scholarship is actually in ISIS. It's only those people who are far removed from Islam, happen to be Muslims, but are people who are either involved in existent criminal activity within their own countries and therefore apparently running away from their responsibilities and then seeking a place where they can actually have the ability to respond in a rebellious way. And what better place than a place of war?
Imam Afroz, we have to take a break now. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the show. If you've just joined us, we're talking about the terrorist group Islamic State and the dangers it poses, not just to other parts of the world, but to the Pacific and maybe even Fiji. Our guest tonight is Imam Afroz Ali, a cleric and one of the top 500 Islamic intellectuals in the world. Brother Afroz, you were talking about the backgrounds of these people who join IS, troubled young men and women. I would say there has to be something wrong for them to actually not find that foundation in Islam in their home countries.
This is a very serious problem. You're absolutely right in that regard. What exactly is happening that drives people to kill and to take risk that they will be killed themselves is something yet to be answered. What's causing them to take that level of step? Because ultimately radical thought is not necessarily a bad idea. Gandhi was also a radical in his time, but he was a person who was looking for positive change. And so what we're looking for here in the case of people who are involving themselves in violence and politics of war is essentially the nature of the world today in relation to the politics of war. You then have a world of materialism and consumerism, and when those youth who are unable to find the answer and unable to survive in a society which is very material driven, then they're looking for answers that as to why they cannot be part of all of this. And then when you have religion, which often tells you about separating ourselves from the materialism of this world, then when passages are shared with them that teaches them that look at this world, it's a material world, you have this bunch of evil people running around and your job is to kill them, it seems to make sense to them that I can actually take this path and take this risk as well. But I also want to mention that if you look at a small number of those who have well been understood by the authorities, and I'm talking about here by psychologists, for example, psychiatrists, etc., that they seem to be more attracted to the adventure, not a principle of ideology, because many of them are also leaving ISIS from Iraq and Syria and going back home because they're realizing, and in some of these cases where interviews have been made, that they're saying that actually I didn't realize that it was going to be this violent and this cruel. So initially it's like an adventure of war, and you put into this whole thing electronic war games and all those kind of things. It really can warp the minds of the young over there. This does not mean that this is an excuse making for the people from the Muslim community who take this task and this responsibility upon themselves to be so irresponsible. That cannot be put aside. But there are causes that actually cause these people actually to go that far. And I also want to mention that there is a small ideological movement that actually takes the exploitation of the youth in this regard, because they also want to be part of the politics of war. When the vacuum of power arose in Iraq and indeed in Syria, then you have those exploitative Muslim extremists who want to take the position of the power in this country. And so they're exploiting the young minds. To me, the bigger problem is the big players. The big players, because they are the ones who are warping the minds of our youth in our region and indeed around the world. And the question therefore arises in relation to the politics of war, where religion is exploited to then bring about the recruitment from the young people.
We'll talk about the exploitation of religion later on in the show, but I'm interested. Let's go back a number of years. 9/11 happened. Muslim communities around the world were ostracized.
Yes.
They were victimized, and it took a long time for the Muslim community to actually be able to step up and say, you know, we're not all terrorists. But now we've come to IS. And are you of the opinion that because of IS, Muslims around the world are again being seen as terrorists? I mean, of course, there was always this train of thought that if you're a Muslim, you are a terrorist. That has existed, but now it's just being made worse.
That's right. The situation was post 9/11. In fact, Muslim scholars were amongst the first to actually denounce the actions without a doubt, and collectively. But this does not actually get media coverage. That in fact the Muslim scholars did in fact were early to in fact denounce such an action in this regard. When we come to the current ISIS situation, you're absolutely right. There are a number of things which actually are causing a very disproportionate and warped misconception of what Islam and Muslims are all about. Because if you look at, say, for example, certain government policies and certain government actions, for example, within Australia as well, much of the effort is, in fact, a disproportionate focus on terrorism. For example, in Australia, a woman is killed every week in domestic violence. That is not a matter to be alarmed about in terms of about threats. It's a reality to be alarmed about. Yet, you look at terrorism. Yes, we have Muslims, approximately, I think, 78 Muslims from Australia who have traveled overseas, as opposed to a weekly killing of a woman by an Australian in Australia. The Australian government has cut the expenditure in relation to anti-domestic violence campaigns, yet have increased policies as well as budgets in relation to anti-terrorism. Yet the anti-terrorism is not about educating and nurturing a safe Australia for everybody, but one which is punitive and one that actually starts with the position of suspicion upon the Muslim community. So we are not solving the problem. We are actually exacerbating the problem. And this is the situation that ultimately becomes the norm by which the narrative is actually shared, that somehow we have to first start with suspecting the Muslim, when this is not the case. The cliche, 99.999% of Muslims are law-abiding, moderate Muslims. And I must say that moderate Islam loves and is a friend of Fiji, and Fiji is a friend of moderate Islam. And this is the nature and the history of a country like Fiji, without a doubt, of Australia and many parts of the world, without a doubt as well. But you do have a political arm which is built on ideology, and this is the critical problem.
Australia doesn't have any written law against Muslims.
Oh, it has
written laws against terrorism, of course.
That's right.
But is it your observation? Are you saying here tonight that these anti-terrorism laws are being targeted towards the Muslim community?
Undoubtedly. The terrorism laws are there, without a doubt, and that actually is a law of generality within Australia from any particular group or ideology in that regard. But the focus is, without a doubt, disproportionately upon Muslims, because it starts with the position of suspicion upon the Muslim community. We had the Australian government, Australian Prime Minister, Mr. Abbott, who in fact made a very dishonest and an inappropriate statement that the Muslim leaders within Australia were not doing enough, when he was well aware that in fact the amount of work that Muslim leaders are doing in relation to helping the youth not to become radicalized is well established in Australia. Yet he makes a statement of that nature and completely hides the fact that in fact a lot of work in fact actually is being done. Ultimately, the Muslim Australians' interest, and should be the interest of the Australian government, is a safe Australia. The Muslim, as far as I'm concerned, my position is not about Muslim Australians. My concern is about Australia. And the Muslim Australians is a part of the fabric of Australia, and therefore a safe Australia has to be one that looks at the entirety of Australia. We have a situation right now, for example, within Australia, that the work done by the National Imams Consultative Forum is well established and accepted by authorities, and the amount of that work that actually is now getting across to the communities around Australia for them to understand what does Islam stand for in relation to extremism and terrorism and radicalization is well established.
All right. It's time for another break, Brother Afroz. We'll be right back after this short break. Welcome back to the show. Our discussions tonight center around the terrorist group IS, or Islamic State, and our guest tonight is Imam Afroz Ali, a leading cleric in Islam. Brother Afroz, you mentioned earlier that what IS is doing is pretty much manipulating Islam, its teachings, and what's written in the Quran. Obviously, interpretation is such that people can derive different lessons from holy books, but IS seems to be taking it a bit too far.
I think ISIS is taking not only too far, but actually completely reading a wrong book, because their interpretation is well established to be informed that they are not only incorrectly interpreting, but actually not even referring to the right passages for the right context. So they could look at a passage in which for example, jihad could be mentioned, but jihad has many connotations. Jihad can only occur under a legitimate government, and ISIS is not a legitimate government. ISIS is a small group movement of approximately 10 to 20,000 people, as opposed to 1.2 billion Muslims around the world. ISIS is not a recognized government. Muslims have not yet given any level of allegiance to a caliphate, for example. And a caliphate is essentially a government under a Muslim Sharia law, for example. And therefore, for jihad to exist, there has to be a legitimate government. Just like a Department of Defense exists within a national security program, Islam also has a national security program. If it was a government system, it actually would have defense. And the defense would be given authorization to use force in the 11th hour where it was required. Not for individuals at all. Not for individuals at all. So to claim that they're actually fighting a jihad has nothing to do with the concept of jihad at all. So these kinds of not only manipulation and exploitation, but explicitly incorrect information to those who are impressionable because they don't know their religion. The youth who are actually joining ISIS definitely do not know their religion. What's the proof of that? We now know from the investigations of worldwide investigations from, I think, initiated in the United Kingdom, that showed that 2/3 of those who have entered into ISIS in Iraq and Syria actually bought books via Amazon called Islam for Dummies. So you don't even know your religion, yet you apparently claim to fight for your religion, is clear that in fact you do not know your religion. So this has nothing to do with the religion itself. ISIS is an ideological movement for political power. That's what it's all about. It has nothing to do with Islam as a religion that teaches us a completely different set of ethos than what ISIS stands for.
You'd have to agree that in Islam there are provisions for jihad, fatwa, takfir. Of course, many of our viewers would not understand non-Muslims more specifically, but how is this, these teachings, how are they being manipulated? I mean, I as a non-Muslim
Yes.
I don't have that
Access.
yes, I don't have that understanding.
That's right. So first and foremost, exactly like yourself, are also the common Muslims, right? We have to actually have accessibility through scholarship. Baghdadi is not a scholar. He was a secular engineer or something like that, without any real understanding of Islam itself, and therefore scholarship is required. For example, if I want to stand in the court of law, because Islam is really a legal religion, so if you want to stand in the court of law, I have to be a lawyer, I have to be trained as a lawyer, I have to be a scholar in law. And the same thing is with Islam itself. So for people to actually make their own interpretation is actually simply unacceptable. For example, there are verses in the Quran which says, for example, in Surah At-Tawbah, where the Quran mentions to in fact fight and kill the disbelievers. Now, that's not where actually it stops, however. So people like Baghdadi will stop right there. Well, there you go, it says, kill the disbelievers and full stop. When in fact this was not the case, because the verse is well established that this was a statement in the past to those who were attacking Muslims at the time of Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of God Almighty be upon him, that they have a right to defend themselves, that if you kill these people, this is okay, because they're actually killing you. So this is the treacherous nature of war. The Prophet Muhammad said himself that war is treachery, and this was a problem. In fact, we also have to understand that at the time of the Prophet Muhammad, we had approximately no more than, in his 23 years of existence as a messenger of God, there were only approximately 25 to 30 actual battles. And of those number of battles, we have actual records of the number of people killed. A total number of people killed on both sides of conflicts were no more than 350 people.
And this is over a 30-year
Absolutely.
period.
So we can see that this was a very different kind of a war that we call about. It was essentially conflicts where people would actually face off against each other because there was a threat upon Muslims, and Muslims were given authority by God Almighty through the Messenger of God to be able to stand up to the violence that actually was coming upon themselves. But there was no killing going on. There was no beheading going on at this point of time. So when we look at the actions what we have today, it goes against the grain of everything the Prophet Muhammad was standing for. So for them to suggest that in fact they are standing for Islam is an offense to Prophet Muhammad himself.
What about, again, I as a non-Muslim have very little information on this, but certain trains of thought, more specifically ISIS, has this logo or motto that infidels or non-believers need to be gotten rid of.
Yes, and I'm not quite sure why they're getting that from, because the Prophet Muhammad's neighbors were Jews. So by the time Prophet Muhammad passed away, there were actually still non-Muslims living around in Mecca and Medina. He didn't kill them. He didn't actually in any way cause their lives to be violent. In fact, they were caused their lives to be difficult through violence. In fact, they were part of the compact constitution of Medina, that they would be protected by Prophet Muhammad. So I'm not quite sure where they're getting that from. And again, here, that kind of statement of infidel is referring to those people. What does the Quran mean when it says the infidel? It means that those people who have infidelity with God, that they would kill other human beings, and therefore we have a right to actually stand against this and save people from being killed. Because ultimately, when Islam gets into a position of jihad, if there was a legitimate government, jihad must, by condition of jihad, must have one end policy, and that is that it must return to peace. That you can only enter into jihad in order to establish peace. And therefore the meaning of jihad ultimately means that there has to be violence and conflict existent in the first place against Muslims, not by the Muslims. And therefore you enter into a battle that has to happen in order to stop violence. Violence sometimes has to be met with force, not violence. There's a difference between force and violence. Islam authorizes the use of force, like police force, for example, to actually be able to use force, but never violence. And there's a difference in that regard. And what Baghdadi stands for and what ISIS stands for is violence, and has nothing to do with Islam.
It's from what you're saying, it occurs to me that you're talking about jihad as self-defense.
Absolutely.
Mechanism. All right.
Absolutely.
All right. And we've come to the end of another segment. Stay with us, we'll be right back. Hello, Naga. Welcome back. Our topic tonight is ISIS, Islamic State, and its reaches around the world and the risks involved. Our guest tonight is a leading cleric, Imam Afroz Ali, a former Fiji resident. Brother Afroz, we hear in international media about non-Muslims going into Syria and Iraq to fight ISIS. They pick up guns, they join these freedom movements, and they fight against the terrorist group. We've never actually heard, I have never heard of any Muslims going into Iraq, not to fight, not with ISIS or against ISIS, but to teach the actual meaning of Islam. I mean, do you have people, does the Muslim community around the world have people going into these conflict zones to try and stop the violence?
Well, first and foremost, in countries like Australia, in fact, it's illegal to travel into Iraq and Syria to either be involved in fighting, excuse me, to actually fight for ISIS or against ISIS per se. You can actually go there for humanitarian purposes. Secondly, any Muslim who enters into Iraq and Syria to try and preach to ISIS will be beheaded. So there will not be any negotiations as far as it is concerned, because there are plenty of evidences for those Muslims within Iraq and Syria who have tried to talk sense to people of ISIS have been immediately executed.
Because it's a threat to
Absolutely.
the leadership.
A threat to the political leadership of ISIS, without a doubt. But we must look at the fact that, in fact, we have those people who are entering through European countries into Iraq and Syria to fight against ISIS. So this is the problem, right? You know, everybody's got a jihad to fight, and what I call that is politics of war, and this is the real problem here. I think the solution to this is that we need to look at how do we in fact engender and nurture and maintain and sustain peace. Peace can never be attained through violence and war and conflict. It can never be, and it's commendable for a country like Fiji to only be involved in peacekeeping missions. And I would hope that there were more of peacekeeping missions and trying to actually keep those entities separate from each other that continue to fight against each other. But also we have to look at the politics of war in relation to resource grab, that we have the oil of Iraq and Syria. Much of the resources that in fact actually are in this region is very important to many parts of the world. And this is a real problem. We also have a lot of what I would call bigotry that actually occurs in different parts of the world. For example, if you look at the United States of America, the New America Foundation did an empirical study, and it found that of the 26 terrorist attacks in the United States of America post 9/11, 75% of them were from white supremacist groups, not from Muslims. It was actually from the very people who actually have a problem with Muslims. 75% of terrorist activities within the United States of America since 9/11 actually have been from white supremacist anti-government movements. So you can see the problem here is not Islam. The problem here is that everybody's got a jihad to fight. And governments are becoming more punitive and more involved in military action, but very few governments, if any government, is involved in actually nurturing, sustaining peace for a safe society for everybody. That we do not see a set of global policies that leads to the nurturing of the prosperity and safety of everybody. It's one government who's trying to take advantage of the resources of another government. You of course are going to get people very, very upset. South America is a classic example of all of that. So this problem is not only in Middle East, although Middle East becomes a center of violent activity without a doubt, and therefore the focus of much of what is going on. But this problem exists throughout the world, and we can talk about whether it has to do with the resource grabs, whether it actually has to do with the bilateral some of the economic trade policies, for example, that actually exist. And these are the real causes of people becoming very, very disenchanted and disconnected from the governments around their own selves. And so governments have a significant responsibility and a lot to answer for in relation to their role, in relation to why people are actually ultimately becoming violent. This question has to be looked into in a holistic manner in order to provide a safe society for all.
How difficult is it right now for the Islamic community, for leaders such as yourself, to go about and to talk with governments, to talk with international bodies, to dialogue, and to say that, look, what's going on in the Middle East, what this perception of Muslims isn't true? Because bear in mind, while you may be sitting across the table with somebody, with the Australian government per se,
Yes.
and saying that we don't have anything to do with it, at the very same time, in another part of the world, there is that conflict still going on.
Without a doubt, this is a very difficult task, and I think this has to be done together with all citizens and leaders from all faiths and all backgrounds. It is something that only that the Muslim community will not be able to deal with. So, for example, in Australia, we do a lot of work in relation to interreligious harmony and coexistence in order to advocate for peace and also to separate Islam from violent actions, as for example for Christianity to also be removed from violence as well. For example, the shooting that actually occurred in the United States of America, he actually stood for Christianity, for example, by which he actually committed the crime he did and actually killed the 9 African Americans in the United States of America. So we stand against all such violences, and we need to do a lot more to actually stand together. This is not a Muslim problem, this is not a Christian problem, this is a problem that we have to deal with and stand for the advocacy of peace together. And this is one of the things I personally am advocating throughout the world, in Singapore, Malaysia, within Australia, and beyond our region over here, in order to see how we can get as many leaders from different faiths and different communities, inclusive of civil liberties movements, to actually have a united voice which is based on empirical facts as to what is going on in the world. By understanding that, advocating and educating and bringing awareness to the common people so that the prejudices and racism and bigotry does not actually exist within the fabric of society. And hopefully we can also be able to influence government to be more involved in establishing and nurturing a safe society rather than being involved in policies of punitive action against different communities that in fact they actually have a responsibility towards.
All right, and we'll take another break. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about Islamic State or ISIS, the terrorist group, and its risks to our part of the world. Brother Afroz, let me put a local context to this global issue. Fiji has a minority Muslim community. We are a multicultural country, a multiracial country. Is it really that much of a risk to us? Can you put this into context for me? Because we're talking about ISIS reaching around the world, finding recruits and whatnot. But apart from this actual recruitment itself, what are the dangers to Fiji in the long term?
I think first and foremost we have to recognize, as you have said yourself, that Fiji is a multiracial and multireligious society. I grew up here as a youngster in the western Nandi area of Sambeto, and being part of the fabric of Fiji, I know that this country continues to be a positive multicultural society, and the government continues to do an incredible work to be able to maintain this very positive multicultural society in this world. There are not many countries around the world that can actually boast what Fiji has. It's quite unique in this regard. We could actually say that Fiji is the way the world should be in many, many ways. And we need to continue and do a lot of work to make sure that this is in fact maintained. So the potential warning signs that actually are out there must also come with the fact that we already have a history of living together. Because if we forget that, then we will become punitive in Fiji as well. We become suspicious yet again, because we know that in fact we actually already have a history. We need to build on that in order to making sure that the warning signs actually are shown at this point of time do not actually become reality. In other words, becoming alert rather than being alarmed with what is going on around in the world. So if you look at some of the warning signs over here, we do know from empirical studies that in fact are well available publicly, that in the Pacific region, including of Australia and New Zealand, which obviously takes the greatest amount of traffic in internet, of the accessibility to, for example, ISIS videos, which are not available publicly, you'd need to have certain contexts in order to be able to contact and have accessibility to these videos, that Fiji is in fact showing in the radar that people from Fiji are accessing these videos. So there might be, it might be entirely from curiosity, who knows. We are hoping that actually it's at least curiosity. What we need to do, and this is one of the roles that I am playing, that I want to play here in Australia, in Fiji. I think the Fiji Muslim League is doing an incredibly wonderful work in order to make sure that there is a clear understanding by the Muslim community in Fiji that moderate Islam is the true Islam. And this is something that is not new to Fiji. It's not new at all. What's foreign to Fiji is this military ideology. Fiji is not new to traditional moderate Islam at all. It has been the existent fabric of Muslim community in Fiji. The foreign element over here, and that is this military, violent ideology that actually exists within the groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And therefore, there has to be a proactive role to make sure that these things are not simply just dusted away, that we are somehow so far away from the world and we will not be affected. This has to be openly spoken, and I want to thank you for being able to actually have this interview here, for be able to have this public discourse, so that people become aware and therefore seek the right answers to this particular question before we slip into the world of suspicion, before we slip into the world of punitive actions and policy, and before we start to label people as if they're all terrorists or they're all extremists. This is not the case in Fiji, and we continue to pray to God that in fact this place continues to be really a paradise as an example for the rest of the world.
For the Fiji Muslim League, for the community here, would you say that we need to completely shut out any access to ISIS, be it the internet or whatever? Is that the step we need to take?
I don't think so. I think the ability to deal with this matter lies in proper education and awareness. It doesn't arise from banning internet sites, because as has been found even in countries like Australia, and I believe in the United Kingdom as well, you ban one site, 20 others come about. And how do you keep a tag of this? And we don't want to add to the expenditure of a government for something they can't necessarily control and guarantee, in fact, in this regard. And therefore the idea, the real thing that needs to be done is that we need to become proactive, explicit in our educational programs in relation to how we must make sure that people in Fiji understand, and particularly Muslims, that moderate Islam, traditional Islam, is the true Islam, is the authentic Islam, and this foreign nature of violence, the idea of that the rest of the world are kuffar, infidels, and we are the only self-righteous people who actually who have a right to kill somebody. That this is not the Islam we actually adhere to. It in fact has nothing to do with Islam. So there has to be programs which are preventative rather than those who are simply basically trying to fix a queue over here. So programs in schools, programs at the mosques, for example, to be able to let people actually have this discussion, because people do have legitimate grievances, people do have legitimate questions as to what in fact is going on around the world, because it's not only the Muslim extremism that we need to be worried about, we also need to be worried about anti-Muslim movements who are killing Muslims around the world. In fact, the largest number of victims from the conflicts in Iraq and Syria are actually Muslims. So there are legitimate questions that need to be answered. But if we do not open the dialogue, a public dialogue, to be able to discuss this, we will then start to have people who will go insular, they will alienate themselves, who will then start to look for answers on internet, and then they will find a friend who knows ISIS, and then ISIS will give them the selective and exploitative answer. And if this person actually is somebody who is rebellious in nature, then you have a very, very volatile cocktail in front of you. and this is not the case in Fiji at all, but we can see the pathway that we have already established. Authorities and, in fact, academic intellectuals have already created and understood how the pathway actually works. We need to be at the first part of that in order to prevent this pathway to actually take into account. We need to move from negative energy to positive energy, and the positive energy is safety for all in Fiji.
All right. Very quickly, last question, Brother Afroz, very quickly. Why is ISIS displaying videos showing people being beheaded, tortured, and stabbed, shot to death? Why is ISIS doing that?
Because it's Hollywood fanfare, right? When you are able to show these activities in graphic form, in such high definition graphic form, it actually inspires rebellious people. That's the problem here, you see. An intellectual person, a person who has true understanding of religion, of faith, of peace and compassion would be aggrieved, would be aggravated by watching a video of that nature. But a person who is rebellious, they become inspired by this video, and they know who they want. They don't want people who are for peace. They want people who are rebellious.
Brother Afroz, thank you very much for being on the show tonight, and hopefully we get to speak again in the future. Best of luck in your work and those of the Muslim community.
Thank you very much, and God bless Fiji.
Vinaka.
Vinaka.
That was the show this evening, but before we go, we have Fiji's only TV opinion piece, My Say, coming up next, hosted by veteran Fiji Sun journalist Nemani Ndelembatiki, using his experience honed after many years as a top newsperson who revels in keenly observing matters affecting Fiji and all Fijians. Nemani will use his depth of insight and razor-sharp analytical skills to dissect and scrutinize issues and matters of national interest. That's coming up next, but from me, until next weekend, good night.
Good evening. I'm Nemani Ndelembatiki from the Fiji Sun. This week on My Say. Geneva may be far away from Fiji, but a decision that will be made there in November will have serious economic repercussions for our beloved nation. It will either reinforce the progress we have made so far or derail it. That's the decision of the International Labour Organization's governing body. It appears at the moment that the ILO is going by the submission of the Fiji Trades Union Congress, which is focused on some technicalities of what should have been a joint report on a tripartite basis by the government, employers, and the FTUC. The ILO has an office in Suva and undoubtedly is kept updated regularly on what's happening here. It should be clear to that office that our national interests are at stake here. It's the bigger picture that is more important than a group of unionists trying to re-establish their waning influence and power in the Fijian labor movement and political landscape. It appears that when they are not getting their way here, they run to Geneva for ILO support. FTUC General Secretary Felix Anthony is a member of the governing board of the ILO, so he has an advantage and can influence the proceedings. A commission of inquiry threat that the ILO has been waving will have serious ramifications if it happens. It will bring back memories of the industrial unrest of the 1980s, which eventually led to the downfall of the alliance government of the late Ratu Sir Samara. We do not want to go back to that dark period. Any inquiry could lead to sanctions that will cripple our economy. The FTUC appears bent on dragging us back. Mr. Felix Anthony and co. say they are challenging the government over certain provisions of the Employment Relations Promulgation Bill 2015 in the interest of the workers. For them, the contentious issues include the right to strike and the essential service industry. These are issues that can be discussed around the table in good faith, in the tripartite spirit. But Mr. Anthony decided to pull out and table a separate report from what was supposed to be a joint report. In that joint report, the FTUC grievances were recognized and noted. If he genuinely has the interests of the workers at heart, he will go for continuing dialogue. His confrontational approach to negotiations could, in the long run, hurt the workers more. The impact of any sanctions placed on Fiji because of the current standoff will affect the workers, not Mr. Anthony. If our trade with other countries is seriously undermined because Fijian goods and cargo are blacklisted by unions sympathetic to Mr. Anthony, it could lead to loss of jobs. Workers will lose their jobs, not Mr. Anthony. He and other unionists are in a privileged position and enjoy comfortable remuneration packages that workers can only dream of. Any instability or unrest always tests the confidence of investors and business leaders. Fiji has come a long way since the 1980s industrial unrest and the political upheaval that followed. Many people have suffered untold damage. The general election last year marked a new beginning. On the industrial relations front, let's give the Tripartite Forum a chance. Too much is at stake for us to miss this opportunity. We ignore it at our own peril. I'm Nemani Delembatiki, and that was my say. For more of my views, read the Fiji Sun. See you next week.